One, two. Yes. Hello, 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 hello. Just testing the microphone, everybody. Hello. Hello. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Testing the microphone. Testing the microphone. Excuse me while I do some tests here, but good morning. Welcome to the David Trig Show. So here we go. Let's get this going. Let me just do a few more things here on this beautiful morning. Thank you guys for being here. We're recording let me see if I can, show you a little bit of kind of what I'm doing. Hopefully you can hear me just fine. Just getting everything ready for you. Checking all the connections on this lovely morning while I make sure that all the buttons are pressed and that the live stream and the live podcast will sound just great and be awesome. So good morning. David Trig Show on this lovely morning, just making sure, as I said, that everything is connected just right so that you guys can hear me on YouTube, on Instagram, on Periscope, making sure that everything is doing what it's supposed to be doing. Let me just check a couple things here. Okay, great. Let me just make sure that you can see everything. You might be hearing some background noise, part of recording from your home studio, part of the fun of being at home. So people talking and dogs barking and all the rest that happens online in live video. So in a moment here, I'm going to introduce the topic and actually go through a few things here together with you. I invite you to come and check out the live stream and to make yourself at home here on this, almost noon, right? On Saturday. What a great day. And I think an important topic here, just while I'm going to get into it in a few seconds, just here testing the stream, making sure that everything works just fine. Sometimes when everybody's online at the same time, you can't quite see things. So I'm not sure, for example, on this one, why the Periscope stream isn't launching. So I'm just working on that. So just give me a few seconds while you guys do what you got to do. So yeah, it seems to be on, but for some reason Periscope isn't loading. So I'm just gonna maybe let that be for now, and hopefully you guys can see me on all the different places. And thank you for being here, guys. Always thankful to have you. As I said, talking about a very important topic today on how to stop living a double life, how to stop living kind of a life that is one way in the morning and one way in the evening. So just give me a second while I get everything here situated, and then I'll be right with you, okay, on this stream. I still don't know why the Periscope feed isn't working. I'm not sure exactly why that's happening, but let's see. If I view the broadcast, somehow it is not connecting. I'm not sure why that is. It's not connecting to Periscope. So got some noises back there. As I said, city living is quite interesting. You always got something going on, which is awesome. Part of the fun, isn't it? So I'm not sure why the Periscope stream isn't loading. That's my only problem right now, and why, even though it says it's live, it's not really connecting. So that's what I'm working on right now. So thank you guys for your patience while I do this and that. Just checking things out here on Periscope and making sure that everything is connected. Seems to be, and yet when I do what I got to do, it doesn't seem to be connecting after all. So neither on the actual app nor on the computer. So that's very interesting. It's not connecting. Periscope must be a bitrate thing. So I may have to stop Periscope because it doesn't seem to be wanting to connect, and it's just sort of wasting time, I think, from what I'm noticing. So let me just see here if I can do one more thing here. Maybe that'll help. Perhaps. We will see. Just give it another moment here to do what it's got to do and see if I can make it work. If not, we will just move on and just continue with our broadcast here this morning. Let me just give it one more chance here to see if it'll load, which I don't think it's going to. It doesn't seem like it wants to. Yeah, I don't think so. It's really interesting. Is anything loading? Yeah, that's loading just fine. So it's just my stream on Periscope that's not loading for some reason. That's what happened last time as well. So something with Periscope, it must be all of these different settings that are not quite right. 800 video bitrate, right? Bitrate. Bitrate should be 800. I have video bitrate. Okay, let's see here. Let's see if I can make that work. And maybe that'll help. Changing the bitrate for Periscope. Excuse me. Okay, well, we're going to have to just go, as I said, without it, because it's not working for some reason. I'll have to check that out afterwards. Not sure why that's going on. Really don't comprendo, but that's part of the joy of live streaming. You have to sometimes experiment until something works or does not work. Okay, so that's not going to work, so we're going to just move on this lovely day. And let me just do one more thing here before I do all this good stuff, and then we'll be ready to go. Okay, I'm going to just mute all this. Mute this as well and go from there. Okay. All right, so good morning, everybody. Let's get into the show. So talking today about how to stop living a double life. And this story from today is a story that most of us know really well. It's a story of, if you know the story of Jacob and his 12 sons, he had 2 wives, Rachel and Leah. And this is out of Genesis 30 and 31. And really the story, which I want to read to you briefly, I want to read to you everything because it's just kind of long. But basically the story is one about choosing the narrow path that leads to destruction or that leads to eternity, or the wide path that leads to destruction. And so let me read to you a little bit of the passage out of Genesis 30 and 31, talking, as I said, about this idea of how to stop living a double life, because that's what you'll see here is how Jacob especially had this choice to live a life of integrity or to do what his uncle Laban was doing, which is living a double life. And then how can you and I avoid being hypocritical and living just honestly, living purely? And so let me read Genesis 30. So it says, when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister Leah. So she said to Jacob, give me children or I shall die. Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Then she said, here is my servant Bilhah. Go into her so that she may give birth on my behalf, even I may have children through her. So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went into her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, God has judged me and has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan. And as I said, I wouldn't read everything. What happens from here on out is that Rachel has 6 boys. I believe it's 6 boys. So she has sons. And then what happens, though, is that Leah then, who's her sister, becomes jealous. And so then Leah comes into the picture. Now, both of these, Leah and Rachel, are Jacob's wives. And so it says, then when Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Then Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. And Leah said, good fortune has come. So she called his name Gad. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. And Leah said, happy am I, for women have called me happy. And so she called his name Asher. In the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also? Rachel said, then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes. When Jacob came from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, you must come in to me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes. So he lay with her that night, and God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Leah said, God has given me my wages because I gave my servant to my husband. So she called his name Issachar. And Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a sixth son. So the same thing happens again. So first it's Rachel who has 4 sons, and then Leah has 6 sons. And one of those sons is the famous Judah, from which the Lion of Judah, Jesus, came. So the big story here is you have Jacob and his 2 wives having 12 sons who eventually become the 12 tribes of Israel, including Judah and his beloved son, the young one of the family, Joseph. And so it says here, speaking of Joseph, it says, Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will honor me, speaking of her 6 sons, because I have borne him 6 sons. So she called his name Zebulun. Afterwards, she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. Poor girl, right? Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph. So here he is, the beloved son, Joseph. Born Joseph. Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own home and country. So now Jacob he has his sons. He has all that he needs, and he's ready to depart and to go back home to his father Isaac. And so he says to Laban, his uncle, he says, give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go, for you know the service that I have given you. But Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give it. Jacob said to him, you yourself know how I have served you, and know your livestock has fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly. And the Lord has blessed you wherever I turn. But now when shall I provide for my own household also? He said, what shall I give you? Jacob said, you shall not give me anything. If you will do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. So now he's about to not only work for 14 years for his 2 wives, but now he's going to work for 6 more years for the sheep that he wants to take with him. And so he says, let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep. And you may know the story. He goes through all this process of trying basically to take the sheep that were not pure or not clean or not perfect, and to leave Laban with the best sheep. But at the end of the whole thing, Laban tries to steal once again from Jacob. And so let me read a few verses here. It says, and every black lamb and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages. So that's what Jacob's saying. I'll take the black sheep of the family, per se. So my honesty will answer for me later when you come to look into my wages with you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted and stolen. So eventually that comes back to haunt Jacob, because Laban then accuses Jacob of stealing his sheep, but really it was just a whole mess. Laban said, good, let it be as you have said. But that day, so here's what Laban does. That day Laban then removed all the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on him, and every lamb that was black, and put them in charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock. Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees, and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering places where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the sticks. And so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob separated the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the striped, and all the black in the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart and did not put them with Laban's flock. Whenever the stronger of the flock was breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in the troughs before the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the sticks. So this is kind of confusing, but basically you're talking about breeding sheep that were clean versus those that were spotted. But for the feebler of the flock, he would not lay them there. So the feebler would be Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the men increased greatly and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. So you have all this mess in some ways of Laban trying to steal from Jacob, but Jacob trying to do the right thing. And so this will make sense here in a second. So Genesis 31 now. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has gained all his wealth. So obviously this was a lie, because Laban had taken all of Jacob's sheep and given them to his sons. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him favor as before. That's very important there. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land your fathers and to your kindred, to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was, and said to them, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not permit him to harm me. If he said, the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted. And if he said, the stripes shall be your wages, then all the flock bore stripes. So Jacob is trying to do the right thing. He's trying to be honest with this whole deal. And Laban is just trying to get away with murder. He's a cheater and a liar. I mean, so what I want you to begin to see is how this whole story of Laban and Jacob really is a story of the wide path and of the narrow path. And so as you hear the rest of the story, just be thinking of how when we walk with God, it looks like we're losing, like someone else is getting away with all the goodies. But really, when we walk with God, even though it may seem like you're not getting all the stuff that you want, truly you're living a life of peace and of joy. And when you're living like Laban, you may feel like you're winning now, but really destruction will chase you down. And eventually the lies will come back to haunt you. So just think of that as I read the rest of Genesis 31 here, talking about how to not live a double life and how to stop living this kind of a hypocritical life. And so verse 9 says, thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, and he said, here I am. And he said, lift up your eyes and see, all the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. So God is for Jacob. God is giving Jacob the encouragement that he needs to keep persevering, even though his cheater uncle is out to get him, basically. And you'll see that it gets worse here. And he said, lift up your eyes and see. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise, go out from this land and return to the land of your kindred. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. So obviously Laban is a thief and a robber. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. So Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock, all his property that he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Padan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. It's interesting that you remember Jacob obviously was the beloved son of his mom, Jacob and what? Jacob and Rebecca. But it's ironic how Jacob here, Isaac and Rebecca. It's ironic here how Jacob never sees his mother again, because she dies while Jacob is out running away from his brother Esau. Remember that whole thing between Esau and Jacob. So the reason why here Moses, the author, says that he's going to see Isaac is to say just to state how sad it was that Jacob never saw his mom again. So it says here, when it was told to Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsmen with him and pursued him for 7 days and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." And Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen pitched tents in the hill country of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done, that you have tricked me and driven away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and trick me, and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with mirth and songs, with tambourine and lyre? And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.' And now you have gone away because you long greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods?" Jacob answered and said to Laban, "Because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force. Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours, and take it." Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So maybe I missed that part, but Rachel, Laban's own daughter, had actually stolen all the gods. And I don't know if that was to worship them on the way, or if that was to get rid of them from Laban's house. I'll have to read back a little bit more on that. Apparently the dogs are killing each other back there. So Jacob said to Laban, "Because I was afraid." So Laban is asking, "Why have you left with my gods and my daughters and all my stuff?" And so Jacob says, "I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force. Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours, and take it." Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. Okay, so Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the 2 female servants, but he did not find them. And he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's. Here we go. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. Laban felt all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, "Let not my lord be angry, that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me." So he searched, but did not find the household gods. Then Jacob became angry and tested and berated Laban. No. Then Jacob became angry, and berated Laban. Jacob said to Laban, "What is my offense? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? For you have felled through all my gods. What have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. When I was torn by wild beasts, I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself, what was torn by wild beasts. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was. By day the heat consumed me, and the cold by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock. And you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night." Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, "The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day for these my daughters, or for their children whom they have borne? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, gather stones, and they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jagar Shahaduta, but Jacob called it Galeed. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. Therefore he named it Galeed. And Mizpah, for he said, the Lord watch between you and me when we are out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. Then Laban said to Jacob, see this heap in the pillar, which I have set between you and me. This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me to do harm. Then the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judged between us. So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. And Jacob offered a sacrifice in the hill country and called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate bread and spent the night in the hill country. Early in the morning, Laban arose and kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned home. So a very long and somewhat interesting story. So I want to draw a few things that I see there. So I was thinking about, if you understand the story, I'll explain it here as I go. If you don't understand the story, really this whole thing is about choosing the right path. All of Genesis is about east and west. It's about choosing the narrow path that leads to eternity. As Jesus said, the narrow path leads to eternal life, or choosing the wide path that leads to destruction. And so Laban represents the wide path, and Jacob represents the narrow path. So you can think of Laban represents the flesh, whereas Jacob represents a life in the spirit. And every one of us has a choice to make every day, whether to choose the narrow path or to go down the wide path. And I think that what we see in this passage is how easy it is to think that the wide path is the best way to go. Because if you look at Laban's life, he was a cheater and a thief and a robber. But really his life, he kept getting away with things. I mean, it says there in the passage that his life, his livestock, all of his sheep had doubled because of Jacob's work and because God was with Jacob. And so he basically was getting away with everything. And yet, Jacob, on the other hand, even though he was trying to honor God and be sacrificial and be humble, it seems like he keeps losing. He first has to work 7 years for the wrong wife. So then he has to work another 7 years to get the right sister, Rachel. After 14 years, he can't go home still because now Laban is saying, well, now work so that we can get the sheep in place. And so Jacob obviously wants to go back with something besides just a family. He wants to take back possessions. He wants to take home sheep and cattle so he can go back home not empty-handed. And so he works another 7 years, 20 years total, to try to do the right thing, while Laban keeps getting away with things over and over again. And I think that is the tension that Genesis keeps giving us, is which way are you going to live? Are you going to go down this path or that path? And it's a constant struggle. It's a constant struggle for all of us. I think that when I think of friends and people that I know, there are people that will maybe on a Sunday morning say, oh, I just love God. I love Jesus. I want to worship him and he's everything to me. And then at night you see them on Facebook or on Instagram just out partying, just at places where you're wondering what really is going on. And that life of compromise is really, I think, easy to live. It's hard to choose to do the right thing, because you look at Jacob's life. What a difficult life. If you remember, Jacob, at the end of his life, he wrote his memoirs basically, and he said, I have lived a painful and life of suffering. And if you think of Jacob, I mean, he was no angel. He was a deceiver. He betrayed his own brother. He made a treaty with his mom to lie to their father. He ran away because he was afraid that Esau would kill him. And yet he wrestled with the angel and he overcame the angel. God blessed him. God kept him from death. Here he is trying to do the right thing. But we see Jacob, even though he's trying to honor God, having to suffer. And even to the story that we read, he's having to even leave at night like a fugitive, to escape at night, even though he's been robbed. He's the one that's been wronged by his uncle. He's the one that's been trying to do the right thing. And yet now here he is leaving at night, like a spy or like a man who was just running scared. And he was, because Laban, as it says on there, he had this look on his face. He wanted to kill Jacob and to take back his daughters and to take back his gods, and all this stuff that Laban was doing was in Jacob's mind. And so it's hard to live a life, the narrow life. It seems difficult to most people. And I think here we see that it wasn't easy for Jacob. And so when I think of friends, I have friends that they may not get along really well, and maybe one of the girls is trying to do the right thing, and yet the other two girls are dressing in a provoking way, choosing certain things online, and maybe you have one of the three friends that's saying, I don't want to live that way. There's a cost to walking in the narrow path. You lose friendships. You lose that vibe or that joy of being out and about. I mean, young people, all of us really, but if you think of young people, maybe someone who's 28 and they're saying, I don't want to go to church and just sit around and volunteer in the kids' ministry, and I'm too young for that. I'll do that when I get older. That's for old people. That's for my parents. I'm young. I want to live for me. And even though they have an experience with God and they're saying, oh man, God is so good and he's so faithful, and they get baptized and they have this awesome experience with God, walking the narrow path gets tough for a lot of people, for all of us. And so that's where this double life takes place, and hypocrisy, and it's something that not everyone likes to do. And so you see in this example of Jacob and Laban you see Jacob making choices that God honored. And that's why God kept encouraging him to say to him, I'm with you. Go back to your father Isaac. I will be with you. I will provide. And then that's why God also spoke to Laban and said, hey, you better not mess with Jacob, because Jacob belongs to me. And so even though Laban was out to get Jacob, God had already ordained that Jacob was the promise, was the one from whom the promise would come. That's why the whole thing about the sons was there at the beginning. It's not just to, oh, wow, all these babies and all this sleeping together. That's not the point. The point is that from these two sisters came 12 sons. And those 12 sons, including Benjamin, including all these boys, came the two most important ones, at least scripturally. Joseph, who was the beloved youngest son, the baby of the family, who was later sold to slavery to Egypt and the whole thing. And then, of course, Judah, Rachel's boy, Judah, the last of her 6 sons, Judah. And from there came the line of Judah, the savior of the world. And so you're talking about a legacy that came from Jacob and his 12 sons and Rachel and Leah. And so you have this disparity, or maybe this fork in the road between doing it God's way, even though it's the narrow path, or doing it our way, even though it's the wide path. And I think that one of maybe the lies that we tell ourselves is that to walk with Jesus has no cost. I mean, it's everywhere in the Bible that there is a cost. I mean, Jesus literally says, carry your cross and follow me. There is a price that we pay when we honor God. Jacob, you can say, he lived a difficult life from beginning to end. What saved him, and the reason why God was with him, is because first God had promised Abraham and Isaac that from them, from their seed would come the Messiah, that through them would come the blessing to the world, that they would be a part of that plan. And so, first of all, it's about God's promise. But then second, Jacob, you have to give him credit. Even though he's a deceiver and hanging on to the heel of his son, of his brother, and all this stuff, he is trying to honor God, even though it's so difficult and it's so hard. And he continues to try to do the right thing. I think that when we live a life that is compromised, when we live this dual life, is when we think we're getting away. We think we're getting away with it because, especially if we're young, we think, I don't want to live that way, as I said. You could be a young person who maybe had an experience. I remember many friends that would go to camp. We would go to camp together and maybe up in the mountain have this just awesome, intimate time with God and crying and saying, yes, Lord, I need you. You're everything to me. And they seem very sincere. They come up to the altar for worship and for repentance. And then maybe later down the road, you see them living the life of Laban, a life of compromise and taking out their clothes online for the sake of fame or cash or views. And you think, it seems like that person's getting away with it or living the better life. You can look at Laban and say, he had everything. And yet Laban was a liar. He was the liar. He was the one who God never blessed. God blessed Jacob. And I think that is maybe the choice that is before us is, are you willing to do the hard work to honor God? Are you willing to, like Jacob, to slip out in the night, running away from Laban and his curse and his hate and his gods, to honor God and go back home? And that really is a choice that God is bringing before us. And really the whole book of Genesis, as I said, it's about east versus west. It's about black and white, flesh and the spirit. And you think of Jacob, his choice was not an easy one, to leave at night, to basically put his life at risk, to leave without all that he deserved, to, in many ways, to take two wives that were mourning because they didn't say goodbye to their father. So there was a cost to Jacob's obedience. But he knew that God had said, go home, go to your father Isaac. And so he had to do it at night. He had to leave in not the best of circumstances. And I think that's the choice before us. Sometimes doing the right thing is the hardest thing that we are going to do in life. It's easier to give in. When you say no to those friendships, and you say no to those two friends that you used to just be buddy-buddy with, and now maybe they're criticizing you online, or maybe they're saying mean things to you, or you feel just alone. It's hard to do the right thing. The cost is high. But that really is a choice. Are you willing to leave in the night for the sake of Christ? Are you willing to honor God, no matter what he asks you to do, and to do even the things that are difficult, to leave at night, to not win the battle, but to know that God is for you. And I think that that is the hardest thing for us to do, but that really is the choice. And that is the path of promise, because what happens? Well, as I said, Jacob goes back home to his father. And then from his seed, these 12 sons. And from there comes his son Joseph, who's his beloved son with the coat of many colors. And you know the story there. And then, of course, as I said, from Jacob comes Judah. And from Judah comes the Lion of Judah, who is Jesus, the Savior of the world. What a great, great legacy came from Jacob, even though he was such a liar himself, a deceiver, but he honored God. And sometimes I think that we may think, well, my past is so screwed up. My life is just so messed up. I just don't deserve anything. My life has been a mess for so many years. Look at my past. How could God ever bless me? How can anything good come from me? I mean, look at where I've been. Look at my life. It's been a sad and difficult life, and yet God, it says that his mercies are new every morning. It's not about where you've been. It's about God's promise. It's about the fact that God has said, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. It's about God, not about your past. It's not about where you've been. It's not about what you should have done in the past. It's about God's promise. And so just thinking of Jacob, he could have said, just forget it. I'm just done thinking of honoring God. I mean, my brother's against me. My mom is gone. Who knows if Isaac, if Isaac, my dad, is even alive? What if my brother Esau is waiting for me to kill me? Which, the story, right? That's almost what happened. And yet Jacob kept honoring God. He kept saying, I'm going to just stay with God. I'm going to stick this out and honor God. It would have been so easy for Jacob to give in to Laban's lies and to become just like Laban, to take over Laban's kingdom and just continue Laban's deception and trickery. But Jacob said, I'm going to honor God. I'm going to honor the God of my father Abraham and my father Isaac. And then I love how he builds this wall between them, these stones of remembrance, this place of worship. I love how he says, hey, I'm going to build these walls here so that from here to your side, that belongs to you. So you stay away from me, but from here to me, from that wall to me, that belongs to me and to God. And I think sometimes we have to build walls around the flesh. If there are things that you keep giving into, build walls around them. Building walls isn't always negative. Sometimes we have to, like it says in the Bible, to flee our youthful lusts, to run away from those things that want to keep us in Babylon, that want to keep us bound to our past. And that is another very important thing, to live a life that honors God. For you to walk in the narrow path includes suffering at times. It includes letting go and building walls around those things, or building boundaries around the things that we keep messing up on. It means saying no to friendships. It means sometimes being alone at night. It means having to sneak out so that you can honor God in your life. It means losing friendships. It means you saying no to the nightlife that you want, that you deserve, that you think, man, I've suffered enough. I have a kid that I'm raising or a couple of children and I've suffered. It's time for me to have fun. It's time for me to live my life. I don't want to keep living this way for other people. It's time for me. But God says, no, it's not time for you. It's time for me. Honor me with your life. Honor me. That's what God wants. And I think that when we do that, when we are willing to pay the price, God always honors us. For me, it always comes down to honoring God with my mind, with my emotions. My emotions sometimes will say, "Oh, just take it easy," or give in to fear, or think that your past is just too messed up, or maybe what my Laban is can be, well, you're going to do amazing things and just over-index, just lie my way to God. I think that, oh, if I can just make myself sound amazing to other people, then God will love me. That means that somehow I'm honoring God. But really, God doesn't honor that. God doesn't want me to lie my way to heaven or to make myself bigger than I really am. What he wants is for me to simply just honor him in the night. And sometimes that means that I say, I'm just a normal guy with normal struggles, with dreams, but also with fears and with shame and with guilt. And I'm working on that every day, but I'm not there yet. And I can relate to Jacob. I can say, my life isn't perfect. Anything that may come from me, from my family, from anything that you or others may see is really just a work of grace. It's a work of the Holy Spirit in my life. Left to my own devices, I would be like Laban, stealing, cheating, trying to get away with things, trying to build my wealth. That would be pretty natural for a lot of us, including myself. But what saves me is the grace of God, is my genuine desire that's put in me by his grace to honor him and to keep putting one step in front of the other and say, Lord, have your way in me today. When I want to give into anxiety and want to give into shame, when I want to give into failure and to live on Failure Street versus on Gozo Street, Lord, be my strength. And that's what you and I need to do. Is every time that you're tempted to go back to Babylon, to live on the wide path that seems so awesome, is to say, Lord, help me to live on the narrow path. Help me to be for you, not against you. Even though I'm just another Jacob, I'm just good old Rachel, I'm just Leah, the ugly duckling, I'm nothing amazing to look at, and yet, Lord, I love you. I want to put you first. I want to live on the narrow path. And, I think sometimes we say, and it's true, that the narrow path is a life of joy, and it really is. But we can't hide the fact that there are times of testing that come in the narrow path. And that when we look across to the wide path, it sure looks like fun out there, right? Doesn't it? And yet we see the results. We see the results of people over and over again choosing a life that seems to be amazing, and yet it leads to shame, destruction, to pain, a life that is condemned by God, that is far from God. And so on this afternoon, I guess now, 12:30 here p.m. Pacific, my prayer is that you and I will choose to walk the way of Jacob, the way of Jesus, the way of the Lamb of God, to walk with him, no matter the cost, even if it takes some difficult nights, even if it means people judging us or us missing out on all the fun that's out there. To know that God honors his promise, that God is faithful, that he who began a good work in you will complete it, that no weapon formed against you will prosper, that as far as the east is from the west, has he removed your transgressions. Give God a chance once again and say, Lord, I need you. And he will surely bless you and keep you. So thank you guys for these few moments. I hope that this can be of an encouragement to you and that you can live a life of joy and of peace, and that these few words have encouraged you. Thanks again, and I will see you next time.